what I'm going to argue today is that it's time for government to come back boldly, wisely, and adequately. And I think I might disagree a little bit with my friend who just spoke. In fact, I know I'm swimming against the tide. I am. But I also know that I am solidly grounded in the history of technological revolutions. There have been 5 technological revolutions in 240 years, if we follow the Schumpeterian lead rather than some more recent ones. The first was the Industrial Revolution. Machines, factories, canals. Canals was the internet of the time. Then we had the age of steam, coal, iron, and railways. After that, from 1875, we have the first globalization, the age of steel and heavy engineering, electrical, chemical, civil, naval. That was the time when the US and Germany forged ahead just like China is doing today. And it was also the time, because it was possible to go very quickly in steamships all the way to the Southern Hemisphere and bring back produce, meat, wheat, minerals, everything very, very quickly. It was possible for Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina to make a leap in development also. So it was quite an interesting time, in some ways similar to ours. After that, we had from 1908, with Ford's Model T, the age of the automobile, oil, plastics, and mass production, which is the one we're still suffering from. But we are now in our age of information technology and telecommunications, and that arrow is halfway, because that's what I'm going to argue today. We are only halfway along. Now, each of these revolutions brings a techno-economic and socio-institutional shift. It's a major shift, not a little bit of a change. And it brings new directions for innovation and a potential leap in productivity across the whole economy. That's why they can be called revolutions, otherwise they wouldn't deserve the name. Now, what's interesting is that the historical record reveals a regular pattern of diffusion of each of these revolutions. They're actually in 2 halves. First, we have the rise of the new, but during the decline of the previous. It's like the 1980s, when we had all this inflation in the old technologies and all the little ICT companies were growing. Then we have a bubble prosperity, or 2 or 3 or whatever. Then we have a turning point recession, as we have now. And then comes the golden age prosperity. All the times that have been called golden ages are actually just after a period of recession. And I call that recession time turning point because we move from the control of finance to the control of production, aided by the state each time. Then, of course, we go to maturity. The whole revolution starts not being able to produce productivity or products or markets, saturated markets, and that's the time when the new comes together. It's the gestation of the new, and then we have the next revolution. So let's see how it has happened. The first one, we had the canal mania, then the canal panic, 3-4 years of recession, then the Great British Leap. Then we have the railway mania, the railway panic, and the shortest time, the Victorian boom came after that, the shortest recession, I mean. Then the multiple global booms, US, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, all the ones I mentioned before. That was the Gilded Age. And then, after a few years, we have the Belle Epoque in Europe and the Progressive Era in the US. For the next revolution, we had the Roaring '20s. And then the longest turning point, it shouldn't be called a turning point because of how long it was, started in '29, and of course we had the war at the end of it, and maybe we can call, there was prosperity in a strange way during the war, but basically we had the greatest boom, which was the post-war golden age after that. Now we have had the dot-com boom with the Nasdaq collapse in 2000, then we had the global casino in the mid-2000s until the crash of 2008. And what I'm going to tell you is that we are there. We are in that turning point, and we could have a sustainable global ICT, information technology, golden age. So that means that the adequate parallel for today is the 1930s. Now, what is the nature of such a turning point as in the 1930s and now? Structural unemployment, de-skilling, hopelessness, inequality, risk-averse finance with trillions of dollars just sitting there or playing in this casino that they have set up, low investment, feeble growth with low productivity, unfortunately, social unrest, populist messianic leaders who find the following precisely because of the unemployment and the social unrest and the inequality and all the rest. Then we have xenophobia. It could be the Jews, it could be the Muslims or the Mexicans, or somebody must be at fault because I'm having so much trouble. We have economic migrations, which of course increase the xenophobia. Talk of secular stagnation. By the way, the first time it was ever mentioned was Alvin Hansen in 1938. Secular stagnation, now we talk about that. Then we had recessions, even depression, with a huge underlying technological potential that lacks a clear, common, synergistic direction. And that is why this is a historical moment for government to come back actively. Now, to unleash the post-war golden age, governments facilitated mass production and mass consumption. We had the innovation enablers, which were cheap oil and materials, universal electricity with the help of the state, and road and airway networks, also by the state. Directions for innovation, suburbanization. Innovate for the home. Everybody's going to have a home, suburban home, cheap housing and cheap lands. We had the Cold War for high tech and the post-war reconstruction, of course. And then dynamic demand. What gave it? The welfare state, the labor unions pushing for higher salaries and more time to consume, public procurement, the consumer credit system, which allowed people to buy big-ticket goods, automobiles, refrigerators, and the rest. That was an intelligent, positive-sum game between business and society, tailored to that technological revolution, and bringing the greatest boom in history. Now, what about the current opportunity space? Could we now unleash a golden age? Yes. We need to turn the environmental problems into the solution, not just global warming, but also scarcity. We could never get every single Chinese citizen and every single Indian citizen to have the American way of life. We just don't have enough resources. So what we need to do is to use information technology to substantially increase the proportion of intangible services in GDP and in lifestyles. What is the enabler? Cheap, universal ICT. We need internet everywhere, in the furthest village and to be cheap. The direction for innovation, smart green growth. And the dynamic demand, it would come from healthy, creative lifestyles. That's where employment also comes from. Every single technological revolution has changed the lifestyles. And then those lifestyles have provided the jobs which replace all the technological jobs eliminated by the revolution. And the other direction for dynamic demand is full global development, not just China, not just India, not just Asia, the whole of Africa and the whole of Latin America growing, demanding capital goods, engineering, and many of the things that the advanced world could do. So they would play a role similar to labor unions and high salaries. So what would we get? We'd get a positive-sum game between business and society, just like before, but now also between advanced, emerging, and developing countries. Believe it or not, that's an automobile. An automobile, it's not a carriage. But you know what? It was still trapped in the old carriage mold, and we still call horsepower the power of an engine. Well, Governments today are still trapped in the mass production mode, and business is caught in the illusion that a minimum state is best. Well, I would tell you that if we're going to achieve growth with sustainable equality, with sustainable well-being, like this conference wants, we need to get out of both traps and start working together. Thank you.